Tobin, for those that don't know you, probably know me better as the guy that made Megalog Viewer. So that's out there, and it's probably seemed as though not as much has been going on lately. There has been regular changes still coming out. I'm sure you've been seeing the builds coming through where you'll get the auto update notification. And I don't even know if you saw some of the new things. Like, okay, when you select on the time bar, this has been out there for a long time, you'll get the time delta from there to there. New box here where it'll give you the average in between those two lines. And that's just a recent build. You can change the fonts on the table sizes now. So if you have small display, it'll fit. Bad eyes, you can see it. As well as it put in remapping function for, like, I know I was working with Dave or talking to him way back. He wanted to use names for fields that he felt were a little less ambiguous about what the field was. But we were tied specifically in, like, VE Analyze and some of these to the specific field names that were out there. And that's been removed away, so that now you can just select up there. But for the most part, I've got a long list of things to do. So we're going to see a lot of changes coming up in here. A lot of it's just that I've been sidetracked and focused on another project here that I'm about to step into in a minute here. But we're reaching a point where maybe we can get that one half stabilized, and I want to actually turn some focus back here and put things like the horsepower. Right now you can go up and select that horsepower and torque from the calculated fields menus, but that's just one more field on there. You get a lot of noise. We can do a lot better job there. I'd still love it if we had a speed sensor so you could do even better on there. Gauge cluster. So you can flip on another tab and see the feedback in the gauge cluster as well. Scatter plots and table generator. That's another one that I know I've been requested for a lot of times. It's not that much work. That's really on the short-term to-do list. We're up to like version 2.92 right now, and I'm really trying to slow down those version numbers because what I'm shooting for is Megalogger 3.0. That's where I want to see, okay, it jumped where we actually get these other things in here. So I want to shift focus over to that. But first, let's look at what's been kind of sidebarring me. TunerStudio. This is actually more of the tuning solution. This is focused to do more like Megatunix or Megatune. How I ended up getting here and doing this, because my original intention, I had the log viewer. I was like, well, we got Megatune, we got Megatunix, I don't need to do. Well, we didn't have a good dashboard back in early 2006. There was no, you only had what Megatune had for gauges, really. And I wanted to make something so, hey, you could make a nice gauge cluster in a car PC. I was working with Eric way back because really to make anything realistically supportable, I felt like you had to be able to understand those INI files. Otherwise, you're locked into only, especially at that time, because the firmwares were changing daily. You couldn't keep up with them. So if you couldn't actually read the INI file, it'd be a nightmare to try and support. I'd be spending all my time trying to change that instead of actually. So I was even working with Eric for a while there and maybe pulling in and using a COM object to access it and just have Megatune decipher it. Maybe go into like using C# as opposed to Java in order to read it. But it started to get like, okay, now we're going to have a big thing with a lot of dependencies and all. I was like, okay, I said, to heck with it. Let me just rewrite the whole INI parser on the thing. So I started off on that. That ended up taking me down to where it was like, well, decide Java. I can reuse some of the components from that. And then scope just kept going out of control because I completely overestimate how fast I can do things, At work, I do estimates all the time for teams of developers, and I can be fairly accurate. When I'm doing the coding, well, then I'm fast as hell, right? I can do this quick. Well, suddenly you get out there in the real world and you're like, it just adds up and adds up. So I've been working on this thing now for a year and a half, basically, in the sidelines, where I'm up there coding every night away. Now, what I really was shooting to try and do was, to me, you heard all day Bruce talking about all the problems that can happen in the hardware, Andy and Peter talking about what it takes to really get this going up and going. I mean, there's a lot of complexities in here. There's a lot to learn to me, the last thing anybody should have to do is sit around and try and learn how to work the software. Or it's easy as heck to jump into some configuration file and edit the thing. That's after you spend 20 hours searching the web to find out that's what you needed to do. So I really aim to just try and keep the application simple so that they work when you start them. And so to me, that's always the biggest objective. And I just always love to get the feedback if something isn't intuitive. If you go out to use it and you're like, I just can't figure this out. To me, it's great when I watch somebody use my programs for the first time and I see them go down the file menu looking for something over somewhere else. And I just see, okay, that wasn't, they were looking not where I put it. So maybe I better really think about where I put it. I see no better feedback in the world than that, and to try and keep the things simple. Wanted to keep my dashboard. That was the big thing that I was shooting for in the first place. User-friendly. Keep the setup, all these INI files. I want to organize these so that you can quickly determine what the heck you've got to put in there. Mouse and keyboard support. Support for as much firmware as you possibly can. And that was back to really trying to be INI file compatible, along with MSQs, because, hey, I like the MSQ format anyway, and that keeps me compatible with MegaLogViewer. That's kind of important. So, and then plugins, so we could take specialized code, stuff that isn't necessarily right for the tuning app as a whole, but perhaps one specific type of a device. So like MS2 right now has a lot of different dialogues in there for changing your wideband O2 sensor and whatnot that's specific to MS2. So rather than build that in and have the product, just the whole program grow and grow, make something so that you can add in these things as separate units. The whole architecture, keep it component-based. So, I mean, it really broke down into the components that I had, where these are all distinctly encapsulated components within the application, so that they have their job function and they're in no way actually tied to any of the others. What this gives me is the ability to keep using these components in different ways without turning it into one huge stack. So I can keep incrementally adding functionality on. So where this has been a 1.5-year effort to try and get this up, the beauty is now the complexity to just keep clicking on new things. It doesn't get any harder. I'm able to just keep throwing them on here because so far I feel as though this whole application, the architect, is still architecturally pure after 40,000 lines of code. That's something I usually don't end up feeling. Usually by the time I'm this far in, I'm like, damn, I want to go back and change a whole crap load of things. But, so it's got the COM access, where within Java, I'm using COM APIs so that it'll run multi-platform. Naturally, right now we're Windows, but Linux and Mac OS, Macs are good in there. Now this runs on its own separate thread, so that it'll never hang a UI and whatnot. It just sits there and takes stacks of commands in FIFO, so it can burn them out. The memory model here is a representation of what's actually on the unit with limited access, so that the access is only able to come in by specified means. Then the synchronization unit. His job is he just sits here and makes sure that these two are always together. The unit is always there. Whatever happens here, he'll optimize or bundle it up. If there's 3 different calls come in, they happen to be close by bytes because you were just updating the table or something like that, it optimizes, it turns into one chunk and sends it over. And so this keeps everything up here then isolated. Down here is where you have bytes and bits and stuff like that. Everything above here is just normal English language off of a publish-subscribe kind of a model. It should have been down over here. Then this configuration. So I built this model here where we have our ECU parameters, our output channels, memory, ECU command. These are basically all components that are within all the Megatune INI files now. But I really built this model to where how I wanted it to look. And then I built a loader that'll load it from Megatune INI files. But you can, really the plan is you can go to other formats as well, as long as we're all normalized up here. Now this is the layer where it's all just plain English, and this is what, it makes it easier to talk from these higher level pieces like the UI that's actually quite thin, and the plugin interface. It can access these, the output channel manager and the ECU parameter manager. Now those are guys where it's like, you can just, if you're an output channel, say a gauge up here in the UI, he needs to listen to RPM. So all he has to do is pass in an interface, somebody that implemented it, and say, I want to register on this ECU for this channel, which would be RPM. And then every time there's an update to it, he'll be told about it. And that helps to keep it nice and simple, so it'll always be plain English values that are working at those higher levels. The UI components, they're all, ground up, custom. They were made for no other purpose. I didn't repurpose anything that was like out there and created for, like Megalog Viewer, that graphing. It's not some graphing widget that I couldn't find anything that really worked for what we needed, so wrote it from the ground up. Same thing with these other widgets. Just had to create them. Now the plugin interface, this is what I was talking about earlier. See, this will give access in the same way. So if you want to add a dialogue or add a feature, we have the ability out there to just be able to access everything through that publish-subscribe mechanism. You want to change a table variable, and you can register to the event manager and post and publish to that, and everything underneath will take care of writing that to the actual ECU. So it's relatively simple, and the plan right now is one of the components, main components is missing, is the fixed dialogues. There are several of those missing, and right now all of those are being done as plugins, so that the source code is there for anybody to modify, change, or extend or create new ones, basically, off of that. Now, these are the pieces. This is why it's still called an alpha at this point, because I did put out a release this morning. I put it right where you download Megalog Viewer, so anybody can download the alpha version right now. These are the pieces that are actually missing right now, core features that are missing just so that we have the same functionality that Megatune has and are able to fully use it as all the way through. Now this is where what we really already see on the roadmap here. Because one thing I've had in mind through the whole thing is to be able to support multiple devices. Because even like, well, say my car, I have a separate unit to run my transmission. And then I have the MegaSquirt to run the engine. I want to connect to both of them concurrently. You can data log from both of them concurrently. Or OBD2. So if you're running a piggyback system, you can connect to OBD2. And you just use an ELM327 interface. And that'll allow you to connect to that. And you can create one single gauge cluster that may have gauges from the MegaSquirt as well as gauges from the OBD2 channel. Now the VE analysis here, this is where, cross-network tuning, because the way the UI is completely separated, it's only speaking through publish-subscribe, it's real easy to, that's something where, well, so I shouldn't say, see, there I go, that's how I end up going to these long timelines. It's not necessarily easy, but there's a clear path to where you can actually run an instance of the application on a machine that's local, then over the internet actually be looking at the UI, so reading the gauges as well as tuning the car, so you can tune remotely, and that's on there. Now, this is what's been really, the whole analysis piece. I mean, like I did the analysis to try and figure it out, so much more can be done, and that was one of the drivers towards doing a tuner app, by being local to the unit, so you can actually put information out, analyze the response, and feed back. We can take these a lot further in here now that actually have a platform that's speaking directly to the unit. So I think there's a whole lot of growth, and that's something I'm really going to intend to be focusing on. And then this is a short-term one, a tuner tab. I want to put in a separate page where you just have basically a layout where you can have whatever tables you want. You can put your VE tables, your Spark tables, all on one page. So if you're on the dyno, you can see them all at once. And, let's just switch over to the application actually right now. We'll create a new project. Right now I am connected to an MS2 extra unit. And it detects the units that's here. So, and then it checks to see if it has a local INI file for it. If the INI file's here, then it'll just accept that. If it isn't here, it'll prompt you for going out to the internet to get it. and it'll reach out to my server and say, okay, I've got this signature. Do you have a clean INI file that'll work for this? When you tab into here, it tested the COM port already. And it always creates the default dashboard layout, basically like MegaTune. So this will be a layout of the same indicators and whatnot that's defined in the INI file. That's primarily probably if you can select and go with this dashboard and then edit it all you want later or change it out later. But at least there's always one, even if, say, I don't actually have a dashboard that was already built for your particular firmware locally. But instead you can select what other dashboard you might want to go with. I've been starting to take a liking to this one, actually. Probably just because I've been looking at the other one for months, and this one I just made the night before last. But, and the dashboards go full screen, so if you're running a car PC, you just run up there like whatever. You can kick it into designer mode, so is it, and that's, well, go whatever properties you want, change your font. Change your fonts around to whatever you might think's pretty. Change the size and shape of the gauge. And as soon as you close, it'll save it, or you can save it out to another file as whatever you might want to. Output channels, gauge angles. That's where, like, this is a half gauge now. Well, you can make it a full gauge. Change the starting angle around to wherever you. And as you see, you've got these bar gauges down here. Well, they're all really just gauges to it. So you can select your gauge styles, turn it into a basic readout. So it just sits there and reads out like the others. Or turn it into a horizontal bar gauge. And all these different gauge styles, they're just different painters, which are they're external again. They're just, you create a painter. I mean, I'm probably expecting to probably write them, but anybody else feels free. You can write whatever you want, plug it in if you come up with a new style, and it's got some set methods. You just implement those and what you want, how you want to paint it. But for the most part, you don't need to. You can just go in here and configure. Probably if you come up with a new one, well, tell me and I'll come out, because I expect to probably make quite a few different painters, because most of these painters, all said and done on here, only have like, heck, anywhere from about 50 to 150 lines of code. They're not that complex, because most of the work and the handling of the double buffering and it's all handled underneath in the actual gauge. Yeah, it's loaded dashboard. Let's load it back up before we mess it up. Most right now, because it's reading the whole MegaTune INI, and I haven't altered it to work any different or navigate any differently from the way MegaTune is. These menus basically are going to work exactly like MegaTune. This typical VE table, it's the same widget that's in Megalog Viewer, so you're able to do the multi-select or whatnot and pull it across and hit your. They'll be colored just the same. If it's edited, it'll be red to remind you. This is interesting. There's actually, though, an undo button. So you can undo and redo. So there's a burn button where you can force the burn, but you don't need to, because you close the dialog and it'll go. But yeah, the undo will undo whatever, because it keeps track of the full stack all the way down. You can have multiple tables at once, or multiple whatever widgets. Open as many as you want. And any changes you make in one, they're always going to be, because both of them are just published, or they're both subscribed to the exact same or ECU parameters here. So anytime you change that ECU parameter, you're going all the way down to that lower blue box where you're changing the model memory, so it gets published back to anybody else that's listening. This changed. Excuse me? I don't know what that is, to be quite honest. Oh, I wonder why. How did it get to be an 84, though? That's the question. There, now it's better. It didn't come back up over here. Yeah, that might mean that that's a beta issue, like you said. Because I couldn't tell you why. Oh, believe me, year and a half, and I sure as heck see a... I've seen plenty of those. Oh, yeah, right there, because when you actually do the burns, you'll get a quick stall. Unless, the way the COM layer is working is, if it doesn't have something on the stack, it'll always just read the next ouch as fast as it can and publish them back, the next output channel piece. So even when the windows are open, the gauges keep running. You'll just, and you'll get a jump there on the burn. But record like data log and then
data log and playback.
Not yet, but I actually, because you log in two formats, and that was exactly why, because it log in the standard ASCII format, but you can also log raw format where it just pulls back, adds a timestamp to the output channel, writes it binary, and that way when you pull it back, you have every output channel that was there originally, and you can go through it in the same manner. But that's kind of even where it was, I keep walking a fine line about how much there. At first, my first thought was merging the two of these, the log viewer and the application, into one app. But, you know, I've had some rethoughts on that even, just because they do have some distinctly different purposes. I'd consider maybe making a version, but maybe keeping it simple, because something like this app now, it doesn't have the same memory requirements as, say, Megalog Viewer, where when you want to start loading up those hour-long log files and it loads them all right into memory, well, this one never has that, where all of a sudden you do put those constraints. And the analysis, I don't know, I'm still working on where should we put that division between what should be in, say, offline analysis versus real-time. Because you need some, one of the components there, if you saw earlier, was the event triggers. Like, that's something that's, it's in there, but not quite exposed yet, is log triggers. So you can set your own custom log triggers. You can just say, okay, if RPM exceeds 4,000 RPMs, automatically start logging. And exactly. That's
this always generates at least 2 minutes worth of Megalog information, and it just kind of writes on the end of it. So you go out the last 2 minutes no matter what. Then you go back to Megalog viewer and you figure out what's on that.
Yep.
That's what I would say on that.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly kind of where I think that should go. Because then whether it's a trigger or you're just starting a log, well, start with what you have in the buffer first, then go for real.
If you forgot to start it, you always have that 2 minutes with this general.
This is pretty much exactly, again, it looks very similar to Megatunes. One of the differences in here, I guess, is too, these are all mouse driven. I mean, you can go keyboard as well, same either way, but you can grab the same thing with the big table here. The insists on staying at 84. You know, and I think right now, that's probably just about where we stand. Like I said, I've got, I put out this morning, I put the latest release of this thing, or actually the first alpha release out there for anybody to download and try. We're at a stage now where, you know, I mean, it's still alpha, so hey, I'm not taking any responsibilities, but my own car is running MS1 Extra 29, and I've actually, this is what I'm using. I finally hit the stage where this is what I'm using to tune against. So, and I've paid for that a couple of times too. That was earlier on. I think we've shaken the bugs out there. Most of my testing offline has been against MS2 Extra. I really still, to be quite honest, need to go through a lot of the other firmwares and INI files to make sure that we've got the shake worked out, because many of these other INI files out there are just syntax errors in there. Now, all the known ones that I've been playing with, I've actually made codes in the loader to overlook them or add the missing commas and whatnot. That's usually what it is. It's missing commas and whatnot. I added those in, but many of the other INI files aren't. So that's kind of what even drove me towards writing that piece, to go out and look at my server to get the latest one, because, well, then it can look at the one that perhaps I've cleaned so as that it works. You can set it on so as that it'll prompt you with any with any warnings that occurred while you were loading up the INI file. And the warnings would be all things like that, where there was commas missing but they were fixed. So that would probably be more, the developers or something might care about that more. It'll always prompt if there were actual errors, and that'll always come up on the load. Oh, one other thing was the navigation. I looked at this thing for the longest time, like, okay, how should this thing be to navigate through? Because, okay, Megatune's very much driven from the menu up on top. Megatune, I like the tab structure there, but I couldn't make up my mind. So what I actually did was I just implemented again. I left it so as that I isolated it all. It's all driven off of an abstracted layer of interfaces again. And then I just implemented one so as that, hey, it just puts them where Megatunix would. And then I threw in one other one where it's like, okay, this one will drive by the buttons on here too, instead. And same thing, I can implement one with a tab. I'm like, okay, I figured at this point, before I go crazy just implementing. Another way, you could pop up and have a dialogue in the middle with these buttons on it and click and it drive through. I've seen tuning apps do that. And all of these aren't that much effort, but I figured I'd wait and get more feedback before I go out trying to implement 1,000 ways to navigate the same application, just because I can't make up my mind. But the main reason I did the 2, at least, was just to prove out that, to make sure I wasn't overlooking anything in the way I was navigating. Because one thing in this setup, I know it can almost seem confusing sometimes with the menu, is that you don't know what is the application setting and what's a tuning setting. It's all kind of melded together. So even if you do go for the button setup right now, well, at least at that point, it is separated out to where, okay, it's application stuff on the menu bar, and it's really buttons is strictly for whatever tuning menus are out there. So I'd advise everybody, probably go ahead, download it, and play with it. You'll probably find plenty of things there to get around. And like I said, I welcome the feedback. The feedback is great. Right now, I don't know how much I'm going to welcome the bug reports, because those would probably be no, reality, those are all good. The only reason right now is I'll probably have so many known issues that are and I don't know, anybody have any questions?
Chance of having like a help, send bug report, some other such thing, that it automatically sends who it is, their email address, their OS,
Yes.
a screenshot of what was on the screen when the bug was like that VE table where you pop up,
That's
say, I chose all these bottom right cells and somehow this middle one just blew. It was very helpful because I was in that early development of code. It was unbelievable.
Actually, even for MegaLogger, because early development is, I probably have plenty of things that I'm finding to fix, but even later on, you go through, sometimes, I want to make it easy so people just get the error dialog, and it's set up right now where, because just that in mind, that component's going in both this and MegaLog Viewer, where when it prompts you with any sort of an error dialog that's an unexpected error, it is a checkbox to actually send to the server.
2-minute code block, or 2-minute dialog block would be perfect.
Oh yeah, to actually capture what you were doing in there. And the config, just having the local configuration, the stack trace that occurred, because usually there's always a stack trace to tell me right where it was in the code. And rather than going through the regular iteration of, okay, can you send me the log file? Can you send me the MSQ? Can you send me, yeah.
Just use that 2 minutes, basically.
And that's right on, that's definitely right on, yeah.
The other thing is, everybody, if you want to start playing with beta stuff, just be fully aware that the next time you download, auto-download, whatever, things change very quickly in this world. And if you're easily offended that, oh my God, I don't understand what, stay out of this world. If you like it, it's a lot of fun being on the bleeding edge, but weird things happen when you're playing with beta stuff.
Yeah, and like right now, okay, auto-update is in here. So I'm able to roll those out, but at this point even, it's quite possible changing the directory structure or something like that. So it's like, okay, the easiest way for this is just, if you're on an alpha before this, we're going to change it to, so just uninstall and reinstall. And that's something that's coming up short term. I know Ken's going to make sure that he sees to that, is getting the Linux support. Because right now, everything's coded to the API, should work on fine there, but I don't have the libraries loaded in here. Well, it's running on Linux there, but I just ran it on Linux the other day for the first time, but the COM layer doesn't actually have the libraries to communicate with the device yet, so that still needs to come. But I'm expecting, like Andy said, you're going to see a lot of changes coming through, so before we know it, I think we're going to have something pretty solid here. So it opens up the options, and then have a platform to try and extend upon quite a lot more within the analysis. And to try and make it simpler. Let everybody worry about the hardware. Yeah, go fight noise.
Can you put, is there upper limits like a tell-tack kind of thing? Did I see like an outline of where the tack went up to?
Oh, yeah, there is.
The reason I ask is it'd be great for spotting noise. If, the noise is happening through this range or something.
Yeah, there is. I think I already told it to leave, so. And you can set how long you want that telltale to go before it resets.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see on that one where the telltale ends up landing.
Look and try this on the radios and see what it does.
Yeah, I've seen what the data logs look like off those radios sometimes. I'd like to see that.
Well, it'd be kind of fun to try it, just in the living room at this point and see if it's, can reconnect quickly now.
Oh, it's something that right now, I mean, like any of the preloaded, when you're doing this too, all the regular predefined ones, like you have in Megatune, they're all loaded there, so you can just switch it to whatever you need to, because a lot of times that's probably the easiest way to, if you want to add a new gauge, put it there. And
do you have the math wizard working? So you can create a new gauge?
just
Is that, the math deal with the other program?
which field?
The parser?
Well, yeah, the math parser.
Oh, well, which,
So you can create a new gauge?
yeah, how you'd go about doing that is, well, there's the output channel, so you can assign this gauge to any output channel that you want. So any of them that are defined, they'll be out here. Grab that and make that a TPS dot one. And set your border thickness, your font size, whatever there. A shortcut for the coloring too, because you can multi-select as many gauges as you want. The first gauge you select is the one that'll drive what the color is. So like making the face color there easy. And then it'll always just match up the colors. Oh, you can't see that one there. But, I figure this is for the people, some people really are good at making these dashboards. Oops, wrong one. Some people like to do that. So I think, most of us, I think, will probably just end up using the dashboards that are available. angles with them like I was showing earlier. So that about sums it up. That pretty much shows where I think we're at right now in the alpha version here. Like I said, download it. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you like what it does. Thank you. No, not right now. Not right now. I don't actually have a car seat in my car. I spend too much time out here coding. I don't even use my car.
Is there any problem with low resolution sources at all?
No. No, you might end up wanting to use some different dashboard designs, I'd imagine, but otherwise it doesn't really care.
Older laptops have some pretty poor resolution.
That projector has pretty bad resolution.
It's dealing with that, so yeah.
Yeah, it's working on that.
Seems to me you already had some problems with that early.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much scales down to whatever the heck. Where you probably, some of the tuning dialogues, the dashboard will scale. The tuning dialogues, they all scale, but some of them are more fixed links. So I would imagine something like this thing here gets big, you can only go, but, you know, you can get pretty small on that too. I don't know how usable it is down there, but it'll scale.
Still got that hole.
And,
What is the line bar? The underlying data hasn't changed.
there we go.
Driving me crazy, sorry.
What are the slots for?
That's for rotating.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's sweet.
Rotating your angle. And all these gauges over here, again, it loads exactly what's the default in the INI, but this is just a dashboard. You can put it in designer mode and change it into whatever you want it to be, just the same. And, whoops, changing it from an analog to an analog doesn't have much effect. And move them around, put them wherever you want. When you come back, it'll for each table, it'll remember exactly what it is and put them back where you left. So or switch them to just whatever gauges. So just trying to make it, so that it remembers what the heck it has to do.
Does it save permanently, so if you call this program, came back in and be like that?
It does. It becomes
By default all the time?
saved as part of the project, by default. It's locked by default. You have to put this dashboard into designer mode before it'll actually change it. Like right here, when you reopen, it's not editable until you click on that, and now you can move the stuff. Even the size and shape of this window, the position of it, wherever you put this window, like if we had it in this small little corner, you close it, you open it back up, it's going to be back in the same place, and it persists across when you restart the program.
Is there an easy reset back to the default on there?
No, actually there isn't. That's something that would probably be nice, I guess, because there isn't right now. No.
I would think it'd be nice on the exit of, you know, at least one of your gauges has changed. You want to make this your new default. Because early you're going to change things and screw them up. Just like that one. Well, you got to either put it back.
Yeah, like
remember what you had before.
It's a good point, because when I demo here and stuff, I'm like, even this is.
You come into this, oh shoot.
I'm like, oh geez, I just go and create another project. But after a while, you could probably become rather.
You just got to file license.
Yeah, you could get to like the project you're working on rather than keep creating new ones, just because you're monkeying with dashes and games.
Why do you see somebody, making an engage for this or that, and then it's completely useless? Their efforts are all.
Can you just grab a dot, like on that graph? Can you pull that one down? Okay.
You can go left and right also, right?
Yeah. As long as it's within allowed values of the underlying parameter, it doesn't care. Same thing with the mouse, so from the left and right or up and down, or with the keyboard. I mean, not mouse.
Can you see where you're at currently on the motor?
You're supposed to.
RPM or whatever?
You're supposed to. And the first time I opened it, there was a green line, but I just noticed that for some reason up there, that dialog, the gauge isn't running either. Yep. There you go.
Bug number one.
Actually, the whole, oh, this is on, I don't see anything moving. So, yeah, apparently nothing's connecting right now. That's why it wasn't showing the green line.
Is it because you're in designer mode? Or?
No, it wouldn't matter. It's just a question mark, to be quite honest.
Bug number two.
I'll check the log files later.
The old Bill Gates blue screen of death on the phone.
Yeah, you can see the green line. Except it's blinking out up there, not in the real world. That's just the resolution of our...
But if you grab the RPM, whatever it is, was it cooling temp? Just slide along with it.
And do what?
Grab the knob on the stem, and the green line will flag up, right?
Oh, the green line? Oh,
If you grab
yeah. Oh, okay, on the stem, yeah. Yeah.
cooling temp,
Yeah, I remember.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So you can watch your warm up slide up that point and slide down. Is the squirt running off that live? So could you just slide it down up and see if the item gets better, or is it you gotta burn the ECU?
No, it's the same as David described in MegaTune. As soon as you make the changes, they're written. It's just it isn't burned until you click burn or close the window, then it'll get
Okay,
burned.
but it is live. So like
It is live.
normal
It
configuration,
writes.
you can just slide it up to your item got better, and okay, that one's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they're all written just in real
makes it
time.
a lot easier.
They're written real time. Same thing, table values or any of that. Yeah, as you write them, they go.
Because the normal squirt is just the VE tables that are live on the fly.
Well, that's where you get into something.
Burn the ECU to
That's just it, because I write them to the ECU, but now it's up to the firmware to actually listen to it. Because there are parameters that I don't think that the firmware a lot of times doesn't necessarily, even though you wrote it flash, until you burn it, it doesn't take effect.
Yeah, some of you have to reset the trigger wheel stuff
Yeah.
and all that.
Okay. I don't even know where Bruce and whatnot went. You're up next, right? Okay. All right, thanks everyone.